Hi, everybody, and welcome to this February version of the National Danish Book Club. I'm so happy to have you here with me. And as you know, we are the collaboration of the Museum of Danish America. Oh, thank you, Doreen, for putting up the link. That's great. The Northwest Danish Association, Desiree, who's unfortunately sick and unable to be here today, and the Museum of Danish America. I think I already said that. We are made possible by the Scandinavian Foundation, Danish American Heritage Society, and the University of Washington Scandinavian Studies Department. And furthermore, we have National Foundation for Danish America, Elverhøj Museum, and the National Nordic Museum as our sponsors. So we are well taken care of. Thank you all for showing up to discuss this book that is definitely arguably not one to make you feel totally optimistic about life. That I hope is something that we can discuss. Whether you, hi Susan,
Hi.
Nice to see you.
I have to leave you at 5:30. I just wanted to let you know.
Well, for me, it's 7, so I'm sorry, Susan, you can't leave. All right. But let's get started. I wanted to start with my PowerPoint. Please stop me and interrupt me. I'm going to share my screen. If you have any questions or anything is not clear, I would just like to share that one and see what happens. If we have any kind of, go. There we are. And move us away. So, there we are. So what I was doing here was starting with, Johannes V. Jensen. The V stands for Wilhelm, which is quite a common name, and with a V or a W. And it's either way pronounced Wilhelm. Written both 1900 and 1901, kind of in sections. One of the reviewers, who was very critical, said it was totally fragmented and might as well have been just a bunch of short anecdotes. So somebody did not see that thread going through it. Translated in 2012. Let's see if I can actually move this on. Where are we? Johannes V. Jensen. His life, I wanted to tell you a little bit of his life. He was born in Farsø, and as you can see, I don't know, can you see my cursor when I'm moving it? Yes, okay. So Farsø is in West Himmerland. And if you look at the map of Denmark, we are up here, north. He died in Copenhagen, which of course is over here, the capital, close to Sweden. Let's see if that works. And just so, make it a little bit clearer, I thought this map would be useful. Vendsyssel, the north, with Skagen all the way up top. Bornholm, the island that is underneath Sweden. Thy, Himmerland, and this is where he is, right around here, West Himmerland. Kronjylland, and this one is Vestjylland, Midtjylland, Søhøjlandet. Oh, sorry, should not do that. Søhøjlandet, the sea highland, interesting translation. Blåvandshoek, which is the name of a city down here and a bay. Trekantsområdet, which is kind of an interesting denomination, but that's because it looks like a triangle. Vadehavet, the waiting sea. Sønderjylland, Fyn. Storstrøms, because Storstrøm is the stream that goes here between southern Sjælland and Lolland og Falster. Østsjælland, Hovedstaden, Nordsjælland og Vestsjælland. So that's where we are. We're up here. But there is a tricky part, because the first village that is mentioned in the book actually is up here in Himmerland. No, it's even further, I think, in Vendsyssel. But it's also an ancient established village right outside of Copenhagen. So if you wondered how he could come from Seritslev to Copenhagen in like half an hour, then that's why the village that was outside of Copenhagen has since been just raised and is part of Copenhagen now. The term Nordenfjords refers to all the people who are north of this water here, Limfjorden, the fjord, Limfjorden. Everybody who lives up north is called Nordenfjords, north of the fjord. And they are, in general Danish terms, considered odd. They're also speaking, if they are authentic, a really strong dialect. So there are several singers and performers from up there that use that dialect, and it's absolutely delightful to listen to them, even though they have very specific words that you may not understand. Johannes Jensen, and here he is in 1902, looking like a very strict and righteous young man, I think. He had 10 siblings. He was the second oldest. And they were all atheists, so no religion, interested in science instead. And the person in his family that I really, really like is his sister, Tit Jensen, strong feminist, way ahead of her time. They had a complete fallout, never spoke to each other again. You can read about it. It was because he had an affair with a married woman, and she really despised him for that, and they never kind of saw eye to eye again. As a young man, he was also a painter, and later on, he actually did sculptures and busts, so he was very artistically talented. He graduated from high school, junior college in Viborg, 1893, started at the university, which is what you did, studied medicine, dropped out. He wanted to be a writer. And at that time when he dropped out, he'd already written 12 novels. Not that they're, well known, but he had. Then he married Else Marie Ulrich, and they had 3 sons, and he wrote and wrote and wrote. And the most famous are Himmerlandshistorier, stories from up there, Himmerland, where he comes from, Kongsfeld, Fall of the King, and The Long Journey. In 1944, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature, primarily for those 3 books. But I really want to encourage you also to check his poetry. He wrote some amazing poems, and he went to the US in 1903, and that's where his poem At Memphis Station is from. And it is really an amazing poem. He also wrote crime stories just to make money. And then he translated and wrote feature articles in newspapers. And then he did those portrait busts. He was a prolific, very talented man. I've never seen a picture where he smiles. So why did we pick this book? Well, a lot of you wanted to read it. And sure enough, Berlingske Tidende, a newspaper, and Politiken, the readers voted, and it is number 1. This is in 2000, when the book of the century was named. And for those of you who've been faithful book club people, you'll see that number 3 is The Liar by Martin A. Hansen that we read last year. And so that's another classic. Then 7 Gothic Tales, Isaac Dinesen, we read Babette's Feast. And of course, Jørgen Stein by Jacob Paludan has been turned into a movie. And we have all the other very famous, really classic authors in Denmark in that one. Kongsfeld, it's a modernist novel. It's not the same as modernism in England or the US. It was called a modernist novel. But think about it, it's around 1900, where you could say that is the era of romanticism, kind of late here. I would say naturalism, the end of romanticism, the modern breakthrough, naturalism, symbolism, realism. But he made this novel modernist in the sense of its fragmentation. Semi-historical, don't take everything, at face value, is not completely true. As you can see, it's about Prince Christian, as he calls him in the Danish version. Lots of things that have not been translated to my liking. Christian II, and as it says in the book, one of the most strange kings that Denmark has ever had. Mikkel Thøgersen, the main protagonist, parallel life with Christian II. And here you see Copenhagen. And Copenhagen had 4 ports: Vesterport, Nørreport, so west, north, Østerport, Eastport, and then this one was Højbro, that went out to Slotsholmen, where the castle was. So this was all fortified, and these fortifications lasted until the mid 1800s. 1856 is usually the year when they say all the fortifications were taken down. Copenhagen was no longer a citadel. And that's because of the hygienic situation that had become completely hopeless. People could not breathe, basically. Of course, there were fires earlier on, and the water was contaminated. There was garbage everywhere. Something had to give, and that was the fortifications. People moved out. Another important factor is the Kalmar Union, and of course, you can read page up and page down about this one, initiated by Queen Margaret I. The current Danish queen is Margaret II, and if you look at the purplish areas here, you'll see that it included, let's see, where's there, Greenland, Iceland, Faroe Islands, Shetland, Orkney, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Schleswig-Holstein, the dukedoms down there, and this little island that I am not quite sure whether it's what it is actually. I'm sorry, I'm not going to venture anything. What happened was that it fell apart because of strife, primarily between monarch and nobility, and because Sweden did not really want to be there. In 1523, Sweden said, thank you, but no thank you. However, please know that the Kalmar Union between Denmark and Norway and all the possessions that Norway had, so that was, you know, Greenland, Iceland, Faroe Islands, Orkney, Shetland, etc., lasted until 1814. Which is when the Norwegians wanted to have their independence, were snatched up by Sweden until 1905. Kalmar Union, amazing piece of work by the first Queen Margaret. Life at the time, okay. You probably had some questions. If you do, I mean, if I didn't answer them, ask me. Students had to beg and sing for their food. Then they graduated, got a job. That's why Mikkel goes outside the city, because there are so many students in the city that, you know, people got tired of feeding them. They had to go to church until 1536. Denmark was Catholic. Then the Reformation, Lutheran took over. They couldn't have a beard. And so, you know, they were supposed to be clean-cut young men, and of course, only men. And then there was Pentecost, Whitsun, the 7th Sunday after Easter, where the Holy Spirit came down to earth and spoke in tongues. This is a national holiday today. You get a couple of days off to celebrate Whitsun or Pentecost. There's a lot of killing in the book. So I researched some you know, places for and methods of executions. Not very encouraging reading or optimistic reading, to say the least. The places had to be visible from far away because they were warnings for all the would-be criminals, of course. Steilebakken, that was where you broke somebody on the wheel, raising the wheel onto a standing pole, and the poor person died. Galjebakken, the gallows hill. The executioner was paid by the officials, so the king, the city council, and it was a well-paid job because quite a lot of people, of course, were executed. Ragon, the nightman, that was the assistant of the executioner, the scavenger, the knacker, that took care of old animals that had to be put away and put down and burned them and just got rid of bodies in general. And as you can see, they also cleaned chimneys. So they were taking care of cleaning of the city. Gabestock is the pillory stocks where we see 2 people, among others, Susanna. And finally, the public whipping, which was called Kaustryning. And we also see Susanna being part of that. Wars. Now, here's another place where you can look it up if you are interested. If you go and check out the Wikipedia page for Swedish wars, you will have them tell you proudly when they beat the Danes. And similarly for the Danish website, where it says that now the Danes won. The Danish-Swedish wars were usually lost by the Danes, and however, the one that we hear about in this book was actually won by the Danes. The one that ends the first part, the war against Ditmarsken, was a miserable defeat for the Danes. Grand Summer, we have a bishop and he existed. We had a show dish, which consisted of a girl on a big platter. Now, this was not something he made up. This actually happened at the time. Then we had a couple of battles, Bösund and Tiveden in Sweden. Coronation, November 4th, 1520, very important, of course. And then the bloodbath 4 days later. 80 people were executed that day. The king went amok in blood. And it was, as it says in every history book, the direct reason that he lost Sweden and afterwards Denmark and Norway, and was considered a king without merit, I would say, and that was his fall. The nobles rebelled, particularly the nobles in Jutland, and he sailed back and forth between Jutland and Funen for the entire night, and that was also historical truth.
Yeah.
And when it dawned, he was on Funen and he stayed there. Then he sailed to the Netherlands, returned to Denmark to be a prisoner, and stayed at Sønderborg Castle until his death. Not a very happy life for him. Then we have winter. Yes.
I've read that the Danish monarchy is considered the oldest in Europe, the oldest continuous. So is he a direct ancestor of the present queen?
I don't know, Nancy, because they had some ins and outs. So usually, you know, they have two strands, den Oldenburgske og den anden, I don't remember the second one. I'm not, you know, as good with the monarchy as my mom was, I should say. But you can look it up because there is a never-ending line, just like you can memorize the presidents if you're, you know, into that in the US, you can memorize the queens and kings, you know, two queens and the rest are kings, starting with Gorm the Old in 950 after Christ. So goes down, but whether he was a direct descendant, I cannot tell you. The feuds, the Count's feud, very important because this is the civil war in Denmark. The Hanseatic League came from outside wanting more power, and that led to a rebellion among the peasants. Skipper Clement, that's the song I want to share with you. On the other side, we had the Danish nobility, and they brought in Johan Rantzau, and he was a butcher. And he butchered the peasants, and he won, and their support of King Christian II just tapered out. And then we had Christian III, the king. And finally, Gustav Trolle, the archbishop, we see him in there, important person. He was the traitor that gave the Danish king a list of his enemies in Sweden, had them executed. He died in 1535 in Øksnebjerg. And finally, the feudal system. So the nobility and the king were always at odds. And that's what we see when these peasants, especially in winter, are fighting the nobility. They want to be not tenured farmers. So I was talking about here, copy holding. The copy holders are still tenant farmers. They live on borrowed land that they cultivate for the landlord. And the only difference is that they have a copy of the contract that they have signed with the landlord. They have no rights. That's why they're called copy holders. They're bound to their land. They can't leave. They are paying a substantial portion of the grain to the Lord. So not a very good living existence for them, which is why they rebelled and started burning down all these manor houses, killing the nobility. Didn't manage to do it. That's it. Any other questions?
Thank
Please.
you. Wow.
It's so much. I cannot, I can't give it the attention it deserves, and we could be talking for hours. And we're not going to be talking for hours. We're going to get started. Sorry for taking so long here. Let's get started reading. And I had a couple of, just to get started, I'm so excited to hear what you think about the book and what you want to discuss. So let me get you started with the usual kind of reading here. I have two places. One is about life and death. It's natural for a living man to boast of his immortality. The most convincing display of vigor and vitality lies in bluster and threat. And a man's finest moment is when he produces a crashing lie. When he is at the pinnacle of power, he must kill. Life kills. Okay, so that was the first one. And the second one, let me go to that, which is on page 29. I'm sorry, I thought I had it quite under control. Page 20. Oh, okay. There it is. Okay. And we had, he was tired of living one more day. I like that. I like that quote. And what is the other one? Yes. Other one. Things will surely turn out badly for me, he thought, full of foreboding. Misfortune hung over him, even though he had foreseen greater happiness for himself than for most others. And suddenly he was stricken with a dim and desolate vision of death by his own hand. Ladies and gentlemen, where do you want to start? Susan, you better start quickly if you're leaving in 5 minutes.
Okay, I very much like the book. However, there was not one character in the book that was in what I would consider a good person. They were all just horrible, just awful people. They were of their time, I'm quite sure. But it's just, the book was marvelously written. It's just hard to hang on to characters that you totally do not admire. That maybe that was intention, I don't know.
How about the rest of you? Do you agree with Susan? Nobody to admire?
I admired the prose, the poetry, and the description of the places, the description of the things. It was like you're reading prose, but it was poetic. I really admired the density of the writing.
Well, I would like to say that there was a part where he discussed the slaughter of the horse on the white snow and the blood and how that looked. It was just jaw-dropping that, but there was that Danish artist named Norgor who did that in the 70s, who sacrificed the horse, and it's in a film that you can look at on YouTube. So the descriptions were just amazing.
And thank you for mentioning that, Karen, because parts of that horse are exhibited in different museums around Denmark, among others, Louisiana. Yeah, it created stir.
Yeah, dear Khan.
Okay. No, I mean, it created quite a stir at the time from, of course, animal protection activists, but he did it and he said, well, it was an old horse. So he actually emulated this killing here because this old horse was dying and needed to be gotten rid of.
And I never knew that it came from a historical, novel. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you all agree? Because I asked you to look at descriptions and look at the way it was written. And I asked you the first question, I asked you, what are your first impressions? The style, the vocabulary. descriptions, anybody? I mean, Linda said she liked it. Susan said she liked it. What do you think?
I liked it very much. I was very glad when it was sort of lengthy prose, very lyrical, because I was getting a little bit entrenched in the historical fact that I couldn't quite make sense of. I don't know if people do have sympathies for the poor king. I think he definitely had some, good ambition in terms of dealing with the peasants. And I don't know if I'm misunderstanding that, but it was certainly a mess. I think of the politics of today and trying to make sense of things. And this, I was surprised for the time that it was so interwoven and complicated, and, who was really at fault. I thought it was rather unfortunate the poor guy was handed a list from, was it the Archbishop, for the executions, and then it seems he became, to an extent, the scapegoat. I don't know if that was just because I know very little about the whole historical context, but a wonderfully written book. I really enjoyed it, and I thank you very much for letting us read it.
Thank you for that, Nancy. Scapegoat is perchance a good word. I don't think he was quite smart enough to be king. I mean, we've had a number of Danish kings that were either insane or semi-insane.
Oh, yeah.
In some way. So he obviously thought that by killing off the nobility, he would establish his power very securely. And of course, it had the opposite. So what they say later on in the book, I don't know if you put 2 and 2 together, when Rantzau was massacring all the peasants instead of letting them go, well, the king should have done the same thing and killed off all the Swedish nobility. Maybe then the Kalmar Union would have lasted longer, but he certainly would have killed more than 80 people, probably 500 more likely, and there would have been even more blood running down the streets. So it is, I think, describing in a very colorful way. I don't know if you see the colors. I visualize this book. It could be, a Netflix series, because everything is so visual in its use of color, many, many different colors, many contrasting colors. And I think that's part of his poetry, that he also was a poet and saw it as such. It also made me not sleep well at night, because there's so many gruesome scenes that you can see very clearly in front of you. So yes, he was just not too good of a king. And the fact that he was vacillating between Fyn and Jylland that whole night and sailing back and forth is what he's known for. The other thing he's known for is a myth that he was walking around a table at Sønderborg Castle with his thumb doing this groove in the table. That is not true. It's a cute myth, and there's a painting of it, but it's totally a fault. So, but he really didn't have his things together. He didn't. Did the history overshadow the persons? Okay, my favorite person is Axel. I actually have a favorite person. Anybody else? Sandra?
I just thought he was such a flake. He just went from women to woman to woman, and all with this story of all this money, but he never went and got it or did anything. He just talked about it. I mean, it's just one girl after another. It was flaky.
And I thought he was harmless. He
Yeah,
was not as a for the women that he hurt, but he was harmless in the sense that others were so vicious.
Mhm.
And at one point, Mikkel says he thinks the young man, Axel's divine goodness was unfair, which I thought was interesting. clearly saying that there was something inherently good about him, even if he was fickle and wasn't necessarily a faithful boyfriend. And also his death, when Axel's death was described, it was, such a beautiful scene and in tune with nature that it seemed to indicate that he had a good soul, something like that.
I think that's right, because he was kind of absorbed into nature and he had a beautiful last day with beautiful thoughts and the sun, and then he disappeared. Yes. So it seems as if there was a little bit of redemption for him in spite of all his flight health, as you say. That's a very good word. I mean, he's okay, Ciel, oh, okay, now Kirsten, aha. And then he just goes from one person to another and likes it. Okay. But can we talk about that? How did you see that killing? In other words, the very simple question, why did Mikkel kill Axel?
I had a tough time understanding the disrespect that Mikkel felt by Axel's not wanting him to, read the treasure chart or whatever it was to him. But, it's a different culture and a different time. And maybe this was enough to get him so pissed off that the rage cured him. So do you have any insights about the culture of the time as to why the rage just cured him and why he got so annoyed?
Anybody else?
Anyone?
I mean, I am old, but not that old.
I know you're not that old.
So anybody else, what do you think? Why did he kill him? Why was that such an insult? The one that Linda is mentioning. Why was it such an insult? Heidi, your microphone.
I
There you
hadn't read that. Yeah, thanks. I hadn't read that far into the book to know that had occurred. But I did read to the point where he found out, well, I should say who, the one man, and maybe it was Mikkel. Do you call him Mikkel or?
Mikkel. Yeah, Mikkel.
Yeah, okay. That Mikkel had found out.
What's translated as? Sorry.
Yeah, that Mikkel had found out or had figured out that the younger man was the son of, was it Susanna?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Did it have something to do with that relationship and his origin story, the younger man's origin story? I don't know. But I'm wondering about that now that I'm hearing it, because I hadn't read that far.
Mhm.
Well, Mikkel was in love with Susanna at the very
Yes.
beginning.
I remember.
And then Iverson went and got her pregnant.
Mhm.
And so Mikkel was furious about that. I mean, that was one of the big passions he had, was fury at that.
Mhm. And Ada?
Well, I think Mikkel fed on hate. That's how he lived. He had to be angry with someone. He had to be jealous of someone. He had to hate someone. He had to destroy someone. That seemed to be how he kept himself going in life. And so as he lay there dying, I don't think it took anything except a very slight insult to spark that hate and anger in him again. But it was always that kept him going.
Yeah. I think that is great. I mean, what you're saying, Heidi, I think you're right. And that I totally agree. And I think that was what the author wanted to describe, a person whose life is living hell, because he makes it living hell. Think about when he's living with that other nice student who's actually studious, who goes to the lectures and who actually graduates, etc. And he hates him for it.
Yeah.
Just let me find something in somebody to hate that is better than I am, and then I'm happy. The people who are happy about being unhappy, I think he's one of those. And I think very much so. That one, the fact that Susanna was seduced or seduces. I mean, it's kind of interesting the way it's written, isn't it?
Yeah.
She tempts him, all those women, and we're back to originals here. She tempts him, and the third time, three, it's so symbolic. Then he falls, and then he seduces her. Then she gets pregnant. She gets Axel, and he's happy, and he has this treasure that he got from her dad, and so on. And of course, I think it's a relation that there is treasure. There really is a treasure. It's not just something that he's making. Wasn't that what didn't that surprise you when you came there? I mean, okay, I'm getting off track. Sorry, back to Miguel and his hatred. So then he is lying there on his deathbed, and he is totally ready to die. And along comes Axel and says, nah, no, you're not quite dead yet. No, you're not dead enough for me to let you read it. And he gets so mad and so insulted. He couldn't even see that I was dead. It's as if Miguel's whole persona is about people seeing how much he suffers. And when they don't recognize it, then they're all really his enemies. So I see a huge theme of revenge there. Okay, the first thing he does to revenge himself, do you remember what that is? Did you get that? I mean, how does he revenge
he
himself?
goes and sleeps with Iverson's love.
Anameta.
Yeah.
Yeah, he rapes her.
Yeah.
Great job. Yeah.
And gets her
While in a
pregnant.
boat. Yeah, and gets her pregnant. I mean, could you imagine being raped in a boat? I mean, seriously, being seasick at the same time. It's really, really bad. The way that it's described and the way Johannes V. Jensen does it. Does he tell us what happens? Why not? Why not? Tell me, why not? We are guessing. Why doesn't he tell us? And then he raped her, and then she got pregnant, and then she had to stay on the other side of Limfjorden, Nornfjords again. Why? Cindy, tell me, why doesn't he tell us?
Because we have to find out,
But how can we? How can we find out?
Well, I found out, but I don't remember how.
Well, later Inger shows up, and he has a daughter.
Yeah. And that's when we find out 20 years later, okay? But the way they speak, go back to the book we read, The Land of Short Sentences. The less that is said, the better. So when he comes home and talks to his brother, and the brother says, well, in a minute, she is on the other side and she's a maid. And then we all know that she's pregnant and can't come home and cannot marry on. Do you see? There you have it. It's that same sensation of, ooh, I'm definitely not going to reveal anything that we see in this contemporary book we read. So Johannes V. Jensen catches that. So there's his revenge. Let me go and rape the one that Otto Iversen loves, and then I'll ruin her life just like he ruined my life, except for one big difference. He didn't have a relationship with Susanna. He had seen her from the street looking into her garden, whereas Otto Iversen was actually pretty close to being engaged to Animated. What does that tell us about Miguel? Let's get back to what you think about him as a protagonist. So, Elizabeth.
Well, I read a little bit past halfway, so but I read your notes, so I knew that Axel was going to die. I haven't gotten to that part in the book, but I am just so, there doesn't seem to be a justification for Mikkel being so awful. I mean, when you were saying before, who's a nice person in the book, I thought, well, his brother Niels seems to be normal. And even his father is so proud of him being a student and, and all that. I'm thinking, why is he so horrible? He is truly, the most horrible character that you could dream of. And I don't know how, with modern psychology or anything, how did he turn out to be so awful? And
Great.
if someone can explain, I'd be happy to listen.
He really is awful, you're right, and he comes from a nice family. And like you say, his brother has 3 kids and a normal wife and a normal life. We may be led to believe that he's ruined by his soldiering.
Yeah.
Heidi, do you want to say something?
No, just that could be. I hadn't thought about that.
All those wars. If you look at the way they describe that defeat at Ditmarsken, you know, where everybody was just being trampled and slaughtered and out in the water, and that's because they opened all the dikes so that the water would come in, and everything was mud, and the horses were absolutely useless. So the farmers there, the peasants, they knew what they were doing. The Danish soldiers did not. Maybe that's what makes you a callous person. I don't know.
I wonder also, early in the book, it focused more on the fact that he looked unusual and he looked like a stork and very, so I wonder if maybe he was, you know, taunted and made fun of as a child and lost those connections and bonds.
Yeah, because remember, Cindy, when he comes home and his dad no longer recognizes him? And I thought, oh, a very appropriate thing to happen, right? He comes home, his dad has dementia, doesn't know who he is, and no, he doesn't belong in that nice house. And he doesn't want to fight anymore with his brother. He's had it with war. And that?
Well, as I got further into the book, I thought less and less of Mikkel as a character and more as a symbol of evil in the world. And where it comes from, how it can be controlled or can't be controlled, what triggers it. There's so much evil in this book. And he's like a personification of all of it. He's there for it. He may be disgusted by it sometime, like he seemed to be at the bloodbath, but I stopped thinking of him as a person or even trying to understand him as a person and just saw him more as a symbol of something.
Hannah?
Yeah, I think it was really ironic that apparently he finds God and goes on this pilgrimage and gets very interested in reading the Bible. He has this experience in the church that he visits that seems to trigger that, but I wouldn't call him a good Christian.
No. But he has the shell, right? So he goes and he's a pilgrim, and that's also the reason he refuses to fight alongside the farmers. I think you're right, and I think that we have to see it as a parallel to the king.
Yes.
The king is also evil incarnate in a way towards the Swedish nobility, towards everybody that he tries to kill just because of power grabbing. But he's elevated. Mikkel is down here on earth with the rest of us, where he can perpetuate his evil so that it's felt keenly by the people that he's around. And I think it's a great observation that you had there, and that when does he ever do anything to be good, to be nice, to be friendly? Never. Not through the book. I think he is a symbol of something evil, or the root of evil, and the king is a symbol of somebody who cannot decide. And when you can't decide, what happens? Well, that's existentialism for you. And there you have Kierkegaard and his image of a ship that's sailing. And
Back
if the
and forth.
and if the captain can't figure out if he wants to go left or right, the ship keeps sailing. And that's what happens to Mikkel. He cannot make up his mind. So circumstances make up his mind for him.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's kind of depressing, because it seems as if there's no way out for Mikkel to find himself as a good character. He never has any kind of engagement. He just marries the soldier life as a soldier, which means basically killing.
Mhm.
And talking about killing, we have to talk about the homunculus, the brainchild.
Yeah.
The brainchild. First of all, of course, it's true that all the kings had mistresses on the side and tons of bastards. And I'm not saying this as a contemporary person, but as what it was called in those days, the bastard children. In Denmark, they were called Gyldenløve. Most of the children that were off to the left had the surname Gyldenløve, Golden Lion, and then everybody knew that they were one of the king's illegitimate children. So that was a well-known fact and not a problem, it seemed. But I mean, here in this context, you could say that, well, I don't know this. How did you feel about this homunculus? How did you feel about Zachariah, the Jew, who wanted to solve all problems by the help of this variant deviation?
I thought it just went straight into science fiction, and I was so shocked. I just couldn't believe that this writer from that time was describing this event. Yes, it was shocking.
Anybody else? How did you feel about the execution scene? Sorry for those of you who didn't finish. Spoiler alert. When Linda, I couldn't hear you. Linda, I can't hear you. You're gone. Try again.
I had a hard
again.
time. Yeah, I had a hard time understanding. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
The boat is moving, and I had a hard time understanding that. And the execution, the burning, was very graphic. I wish they made this book into a movie. It would be interesting
I don't know.
to see it, because you could visualize it. You could visualize it as you were reading it. I mean, I could, as I read it, everything was so graphic in my head. Yeah.
I'm just not sure I'd want to watch it.
Yeah.
No,
Okay,
neither.
but for all of you who might be interested, there is a movie out called Margaret, Queen of the North right now. And it's about Queen Margaret the First, and you can watch it on Netflix. Margaret, Queen of the North. And it's dark, yes. I mean, I think these were dark times, and I think we forget that from time to time. But it is out. So if you can't find it, let me know. I don't know. I think that what Johannes V. Jensen is focusing on very much is the gruesome sides of human nature. And then he has astonishing periods in the book where he focuses on spring, bird song, chirping, leaves greening, everything beautiful, and as if life has a new, rising out of the ashes. So for me, that's such a weird mixture that when humans are concerned, it's all darkness. Where nature is concerned, he focuses on beauty to a large extent.
And I, just while you're saying that, it reminded me of what I said about the snow. Can I read just one quick sentence from that?
Please.
So on page 96, it says, the snow was different, fine, sharp as pumice. It left its mark on you, burned like fire. It was like spines of snow fell down from the boughs of the trees. If they hit your skin, they sat like greedy leeches. The Swedish snow is purified. Anyway, there was something, and then it went on to talk about it. It drank away on the back of your hand like a bloodsucker, devouring everything it came in contact with. It was the worst kind of snow. And I was like, wow, that is some snow.
It's not pretty nature. No, you're right. And that, of course, is in the middle of a battle. Yeah. But that is very graphic. And he possesses those powers of making everything come to life in front of our eyes, right? It's very, very visual.
Mm.
I also wanted to ask you about the, God, I don't even know, the fiddler, is that what I did not check the translate, I didn't check the translation for everything, because
Yeah.
I got so annoyed with the translator that I kind of
Yeah.
couldn't.
Yeah,
They called him a fiddler.
yeah.
Good. He's a happy man. He takes this little child, the deaf-mute grandchild of Mikkel, and takes care of her. There's another good person, right? He plays, they're missed when they don't show up. They spread joy. Why does he kill himself? What is going on? Yes, Heidi, I'm sorry. At the very end. Why? Susanna, what do you think? Did you read it to the end?
No, I did not read it to the end. I read very little of it. But I appreciate this discussion because I wanted to come to find out whether I wanted to continue reading the book. And I did discover early that about the language. And so I started reading the Danish version. And I find it very accessible. So that's a motivator to continue. And now I've heard several other things that make me want to continue. I've heard several other things that I know I'm not going to like, but I will be more aware of them and be able to follow along. I think I probably have a lifetime activity to finish this book, though.
Yeah. Hennet?
Yeah, regarding Jacob's death, I mean, clearly something had gone wrong with him, whether it was, alcoholism that was causing him to have all these, terrible visions, if he had some kind of encephalitis, or, brain disease. So I don't know, but I think he just couldn't handle it any longer.
Yeah.
I mean, life was becoming so awful with all those rats and rabbits and.
Yeah.
At first, I actually wanted, does he have rabies? But then this lasted too long because at rabies, you die within 10 days of your clinical symptoms. So that
I
was
wondered about that, if it was
Yeah.
DTs he was having or what kind of psychological breakdown he was having, because, when someone.
I also think that he had felt very responsible for Edie, the little girl.
Yeah.
And she was grown now and, they came to Sønderborg Castle so that he was hoping that Mikkel would, take over as grandfather. And of course, he just had no interest. And I actually thought that was very interesting that on both sides, Susanna also had absolutely no interest, in Axel. Was it Axel who found her? I thought that was just interesting that they just didn't care at all.
I felt that the loose end of Ida was tied up, that she had found a soldier who she was caring for him. And then she must be receiving protection from him as well.
Yes.
So maybe he felt that his job was done, and so he killed himself.
But I think it was alcohol. I think it was delirium tremens. Yeah, that made him kill himself. That he simply realized, okay, I cannot stop drinking. This is it. So there's another sad destiny at the end. I mean, where you want him to be happy and continue with his absolutely lovely fiddling. Remember that anecdote where his strings broke and he just took a stick and oiled it. And okay, I can use that. So he was quite a talented fiddler. The last thing I want to ask you about, because time is just going as usual, way too quickly. Dreams. How did you see the dreams in the book? There's so many dreams and their omens. And how did you read the dreams? Khan, you had one you loved or what?
Well, I mean, because some of them you couldn't tell that it was a dream until further into it. And I really want to say that I'm going to have to read the book 2 more times in order to understand all the questions that you put out, because you really have to read carefully to do that. And there's a lot in this book.
You don't have to, Khan. That's fine. It's not.
I want to, though. I do. I love that.
I read the book many times, and it's
Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
there's is where I'm thinking, what the heck? And
Yeah.
especially the dreams, because they go off in so many different directions. And I was talking to Linda about the grotto, you know, the second to the last chapter, where Linda was saying, but that's an Icelandic saga. And, you know, he's just using everything. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, Linda.
Yeah, I thought that was a very powerful image, sort of even before the Norns, like the, what do they call it, the giants of that preceded Odin, that they were grinding and they ground things into existence and they ground things out of existence. And if he was hearing all of this grinding, I mean, he was hearing all of this grinding and it drove him nuts. And I can tell you, after my first COVID shot, I hear grinding all the time. The doctor calls it tinnitus. But I researched the grotto, and yeah, I just ordered the book in Icelandic and in English to see. Yeah, it is a saga, and it says that the author has translated the Icelandic some of the Icelandic sagas. So I'm very interested to see what goes on there, because the idea of grinding something out of existence or grinding something into existence, now that's something different. Sort of like the Norns weaving fates.
Yeah, weaving fates, yeah, cutting the threads. But I mean, I think that's what Johannes V. Jensen was so amazing at. His language, his style, his poetry, his knowledge, how much he had read, how much he could combine. And of course, I felt the need to put it into historical context, but you could say, oh, well, I guess it's just a book that's written, and if you don't know anything about Christian II, you're still good. I don't know. Khan, did you have a comment?
No, I mean, I think the background and the history of it really helps. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I would understand it as well as with all that background. Yeah.
I think I learned about that bloodbath in Stockholm in 5th grade. When we had history in 5th grade. That was a big deal. And I can still remember thinking, my gosh, the blood was flowing down the street. It made such a horrible impression on me as a little girl. And so, yeah, so Danish history, and of course, any kind of colonializing and battling history is gruesome and bloody. And that, I think, also Johannes V. Jensen caught. You started out by saying this is all about being evil, vicious, and mean, and killing and murderous. And that's life. And that's when you kind of say, okay, I want to read a book of comics now.
But I had the feeling that this was really what life was like then.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's just what it was. And I felt that about a lot of the book. You know, I kept thinking, because so many people didn't have plans, they didn't have goals, they just kind of wandered around and whatever. And I thought, well, back then, if you thought you were going to die, you know, soon or anything, I guess you wouldn't have these plans, you know.
And I think you're right. That rootlessness, the vacillation, the being totally fickle, that must have been part of it. How do I eat tomorrow? If you were a student, you had to beg for your food. How do I eat tomorrow? If you're a pilgrim with your shell, your conch there, how do I eat tomorrow? Always that insecurity. And do I support this group or do I support that group? Because there would always be two battling factions in the world around you, and you'd have to choose sides. Notice, as they were battling, as Johann Rantzau was killing off the peasants, there were other farmers that were just peacefully plowing their land, that had decided to stay out of the conflict.
Yeah.
And that's just it. Life may go on if you choose not to be in the fray. So
But
you
I
can
think
also choose to be
those
in-
same farmers got killed in the reprise. later
Well,
on, I think. Yeah.
Probably,
Yeah.
but especially the ones that they went after, and they couldn't kill off all the farmers because they needed them to cultivate the
yeah.
land. The plight of the lords, right? So, yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I mean, I do think it's a masterpiece. It's just an amazing book, and reread it, yes, and think about it, because it will feed you and give you new thoughts. It's not a book to be read just once. And unfortunately, like I said, if you could read it in Danish, it is better. There are just some translations that are a little bit flawed in my mind. It's hard to judge, because it's really hard to translate, but whatever you can do. Thank you so much for being here. And
Thank
might
you.
I add that next month, moving on to a modern book, it's called Baboon, but it's very different, and from a modern young author. So I hope we'll have an equally stimulating discussion about that. And like I said, I'll share my song. I want you to hear this battle song of the peasants as they were going out, fighting those, well, German mercenaries. And I really want you to keep thinking about it. And if you have any questions, do write to me, or anything you want to share with the group, do write to me, and it can go up on the website. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.